The body hit the ground at 11:43 p.m. Adrian Volkov didn't check his watch. He knew the time, the way he knew everything precisely, without effort, the way some men know how to breathe. He stood in the alley with blood still warm on his hands and counted the seconds it took for the silence to settle back into place. It always settled. That was the thing people never understood about men like him. The world didn't shake when they moved through it. It simply rearranged itself, quietly, without complaint. He was already calculating the exit when he heard it. Not a scream, not a sob, just breath. Careful and controlled and furious, he turned. She was in the corner behind the rusted industrial shelf, pressed into the shadows the way small animals press into the dark when they know what's coming. Her side was bleeding, soaking through the gray fabric of her jacket in a slow, certain bloom. She'd been there the whole time, long enough to see everything. Whether the blood on her side belonged to whatever had driven her into that alley, or to something connected to the man now lying at Adrian's feet, he could not yet tell. Their eyes met. Adrian had looked into the eyes of men twice her size in the last seconds of their lives. Fear had a specific architecture it built itself up in layers, and once you knew what to look for, you could see it from across a room. The trembling hands, the widened pupils, the mouth that opened and forgot how to form words. She had none of it. What she had instead was a piece of broken glass held in her bleeding fist, pointed directly at him. "Don't," she said. One syllable, flat and certain as a door closing. He almost smiled. Almost. Adrian Volkov had dismantled men, networks, entire organizations, and not once, in all of it, had he ever made a decision he couldn't explain. Every action had a logic. Every choice a calculation. He was not a man who acted on instinct because instinct, in his experience, was just another word for mistake. He crossed the alley, picked her up off the ground, and carried her out. He would spend a long time trying to explain that. She woke up the way people wake when sleep has never been safe all at once. Eyes open, body still, no confusion. No soft transition between dreaming and here, just awake. Adrian had been watching from the doorway for 11 minutes. Long enough to learn something. Before she moved a single muscle, her eyes went to the window, then the door, then the ceiling cataloging the shape of the room, the angles, the exits. Only after she'd accounted for all of it did she look at him. Not with relief, not with fear. With the flat, measuring calm of someone who had woken up in worse places and survived those too. "You're in my penthouse," he said. "Top private level, 14th floor. The doors are locked. My men are in the hall." She said nothing, which was itself a kind of answer. "Your name?" he said. A pause, not the hesitation of someone thinking, but of someone choosing. Selecting from a list of available options and discarding the ones that cost too much. "Lena," she said. The lie arrived clean and practiced, stripped of everything that might make it ring false. No over-explanation, no eye contact held a beat too long. Just the one word, offered up like something that had always been true. Adrian let it stand. He'd spent 20 years in a world built on misdirection, and the ones who lied badly were never the danger they gave themselves away like amateurs, sweating through their shirts, layering excuse over excuse until the whole thing collapsed. The ones who lied like this, with economy, with stillness, were something else entirely. While she slept, his men had gone through everything. The jacket, the boots, good ones, resoled twice, worn down at the heel from someone who moved constantly and never stopped moving for long. No identification, no phone, no cash. Not even the ghost of a name anywhere on her person. People who left no trace didn't do so by accident. A person without a record wasn't invisible. They were erased. He brought her a glass of water and set it on the table beside the bed without comment. She didn't touch it until he looked away, paranoid, precise. Completely, quietly, unafraid. Adrian stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and looked out over the city and understood that whatever she was she wasn't helpless. He had not carried a stray girl up 14 floors and put her in his guest room. He had let something in, and he had no idea yet what it was. By the second day, she had memorized his building. He knew because he'd been watching. Not obviously, Adrian had never done anything obviously in his life. But from the feeds, from the deliberate placement of certain objects, from the quiet reports filed by men who were paid to notice things and still managed to miss half of what she did, a picture assembled itself. She'd clocked the cameras by hour 3, every blind spot by end of day 1. She knew which guard rotated at 40-minute intervals and which one stretched the gap to 50 when he thought no one was timing him. She ate when food was brought methodically, without pleasure, the way soldiers ate on long operations when the body was fuel and nothing more. She slept in intervals of 90 minutes, always with her back to the wall. She was healing faster than she should have been. The wound in her side had been deep. Adrian had seen the same injury take a grown man off his feet for 2 weeks. By day 3, she was moving without favoring it. Not performing health actually recovered, or close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. He set the first trap on the morning of day 4. Simple. A door left unlocked that shouldn't have been. A clear line to the stairwell, unguarded, apparently by oversight. He watched from the feed to see if she'd run. She stood in front of the door for a long moment. Then she looked directly at the camera above it, the one angled so she shouldn't have been able to see it, and walked away. He set the second trap that afternoon. A man in the corridor, pretending carelessness, weapon visible at the hip. Not a threat, a test of instinct. She disarmed him in under 3 seconds, not with panic, not by accident. With a clean, economical efficiency that had the shape of years behind it, the way musicians play scales without thinking, the way fighters move through forms in their sleep. The man stood blinking at his own empty holster, and she had already stepped back and was watching Adrian with something that might, on another woman's face, have been called an apology. On hers, it looked like a warning. "I didn't ask to be tested," she said. "You didn't have to," he said. "You already answered." He stopped pretending the situation was anything other than what it was. Whatever had trained her had done it thoroughly, and whatever she was running from, she hadn't run far enough. The body turned up on a Wednesday. A man named Reuter, small operator, mid-level connections, the kind of man whose death would ordinarily be filed under unremarkable. Nobody important enough to mourn publicly, nobody obscure enough to go unnoticed. He was found in a car park 3 blocks from Adrian's building, and the kill was clean, in the way that only a very specific kind of professional makes things clean. No struggle, no wasted movement, no performance of violence. Just the end result, delivered with precision. The detail that made Adrian's throat tighten was not the method. It was the mark. Carved into the skin between the shoulder blades, shallow, deliberate, a symbol that took patience to execute on a living body. A symbol Adrian hadn't seen in over 6 years. He'd been told it was extinct. He'd had specific, reliable reasons to believe that. Reasons that had cost him significantly to obtain. He'd built a significant portion of the last several years on the assumption that the organization behind that symbol had been dismantled. He stood in the car park at 2 a.m. with the photograph in his hand and felt something he rarely permitted himself, something very close to dread. The war he'd barely survived had begun with a symbol exactly like this one. Not a declaration those were for men who wanted to be understood. This was a message written in a language only those who'd lived through it could read. It meant, "We know where you are. We know who you've taken in. We are reminding you of the cost." He returned to the penthouse before dawn and stood in the doorway of the room where she slept and looked at her for a long time. She was still. Controlled even in sleep. Even now, knowing what he knew, she looked like a woman who could handle whatever was coming. Maybe she could. But the question was no longer what she'd survived before she arrived at his door. The question was what she'd dragged in behind her. He'd been operating under the assumption that she was collateral, A coincidence he'd let himself be moved by. He revised that assumption now, cleanly and completely, the way he revised all assumptions when the evidence demanded it. She hadn't stumbled into his alley by accident. She had arrived carrying a war he thought was over, and it had followed her, faithfully, all the way to his door. The truth she refuses to give, he didn't raise his voice. He never did. Men who raised their voices were men who needed to. He set the photograph on the table between them, the symbol, rendered precisely, and sat across from her and waited. He had the patience of someone who had conducted long interrogations in cold rooms and understood that silence, properly deployed, was more pressure than anything shouted. She looked at the photograph. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, not fear, the particular tightening that happened when recognition arrived faster than a person wanted it to. She knew the symbol. She'd known it the moment she saw it, and she wasn't bothering to pretend she hadn't, which told him more than a lie would have. "There's a body," he said. 3 blocks from here. This was on him. She said nothing. There will be more. Not a question. He watched her jaw tighten. You knew that before you ever woke up in this building. Still nothing. But her hands, resting flat on the table, were very still in the way that hands became still when their owner was working hard to keep them that way. "Tell me who sent you," he said. "Tell me what they want. Tell me the actual name that's on whatever documents don't exist anywhere in any system, and we begin to manage this." "I didn't ask you to save me," she said. The sentence arrived without heat. It was not a deflection, it was a perimeter. A wall built not from anger but from something older and more structural, like the kind of wall a person built after being failed by the people who were supposed to be their protection. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You're not hiding from me," he said slowly. Not a question, a revision in real time. "You're hiding from them." He paused. "You're afraid that what you tell me will get back to them before you're ready." Something shifted in her eyes. Fractional. Involuntary. The kind of reaction that couldn't be trained away because it happened below the level where training reached. He'd been right. She wasn't protecting secrets from him. She was protecting the one person in the room who was still alive and needed to stay that way, herself. She didn't trust him, not yet, possibly not ever, and her silence wasn't defiance. It was survival. And he understood that language better than any other. He increased security before sunrise. Not because he believed walls could stop what was coming, but because patterns always repeated, and the first message had already been delivered. The next would arrive in person. The man who comes looking. They didn't announce themselves. They never did. The first sign was the power, a professional cut, surgical, targeted at the floor, leaving the rest of the building untouched and therefore unalarmed. The second was the silence of the hallway feed. Not static, not disruption, but the flat black of a camera that had been covered from the outside. Clean work, deliberate work. The work of people who had done this many times and had long since stopped improvising. Adrian was already moving. There were 4 of them he counted by sound before he saw them. And sound in that corridor meant they were good but not exceptional, because exceptional left nothing to hear. They came in staggered formation, weapons up, torchlight cutting the dark in disciplined sweeps. Not amateurs, not hired aggression. Trained operatives with a target objective, and the confidence of people who expected limited resistance. They got something else entirely. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not something Adrian could have fully choreographed it, unfolded the way violence unfolded when 2 prepared forces met in a confined space, in the dark, where the only advantage was who hesitated first. He handled 2 of them. His men in the stairwell handled a third. The 4th reached the corridor where she was. He didn't reach her for long. Adrian turned at the sound, or rather, the absence of sound, the specific silence that followed a confrontation that ended faster than it began, and saw her standing over the man with her chest heaving and her expression somewhere between fury and something that looked painfully like exhaustion. Not the tiredness of the body, The tiredness of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had not, at any point, chosen it. She fought the way he moved through the world, not with bravado, not with theater, but with the flat, ruthless efficiency of someone for whom violence was not a last resort, but a language they'd been taught to speak before they were old enough to refuse the lesson. She was breathing hard. So was he. In the new quiet, with 4 men on the floor and the smell of plastered dust in the air, Adrian looked at her across the dark corridor and felt something shift permanently in his understanding of the situation. "Who are you?" he said. "Not a question anymore." A demand the only currency he had left. She looked at him for a long moment, and this time, he thought, she might actually tell him. Her real name was Sable. Not a name given at birth, nothing so simple, a designation. The kind assigned in place of an identity when an identity had been considered unnecessary, even counterproductive. Names created attachment. Names made a person legible, locatable, human in ways that complicated operational efficiency. The organization she'd come from had understood this and had acted accordingly. She told him in the dark. Sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her wounded side pressed carefully between her arm and her ribs, and her voice had the flat cadence of someone reciting a history that belonged to a version of themselves they'd since tried very hard to outrun. The organization had several names, depending on who was being asked and what they were afraid of. Adrian knew it by the one it had used when it nearly destroyed him 6 years ago. He'd been told it was gone. He'd been given evidence, bodies, facilities, names struck from every operative list he had access to. He understood now that the evidence had been arranged. "I was recruited at 14, she said, no inflection. Conditioned for 7 years. There were 12 of us in my cohort. I don't know how many are still alive." A pause. "I stopped wanting to know. What made you run?" She was quiet for a moment, not evasive processing, or choosing how much truth the moment could hold. "They gave me a contract," she said, "for someone who didn't deserve it, someone who had nothing to do with any of it." She looked at him steadily. "I declined. And they came for you." "They always come," she said. "That's the only thing they do consistently." She'd spent months moving through safe houses, freight routes, and identities that never lasted long enough to become real before someone found the seam and pulled. Adrian sat with this for a long moment, the weight of it. The specific gravity of a past that had just reached into his present with both hands. He'd built everything he had on the understanding that certain wars were over, on the assumption that survival, past a certain point, converted to safety. He'd been wrong. And the wrongness of it was sitting 3 feet away from him, looking at him with the tired eyes of someone who had been right about danger her entire life and found no comfort in it. She hadn't come to him for rescue. She had come because she had run out of everywhere else to go. And now, by the simple act of existing in his building for 5 days, she had made his war hers and her war his, a merger of catastrophes, sealed without a signature. The choice that destroys everything. The offer came through intermediaries, which was the polite way of saying it arrived without fingerprints. The terms were clean. Walk away. Remove his resources from the equation. Return the asset, their word, not his. Though the clinical precision of it told him everything about how she was valued and receive in exchange the cessation of hostilities. Resumption of the particular status quo that had made the last 6 years tolerable. His operations untouched. His network intact. His people safe. It was, by every metric he had ever used to evaluate a decision, the correct choice. He was not a sentimental man. He had never permitted himself the luxury of decisions made on feeling rather than calculation. The men who served under him understood this and trusted him because of it, not in spite of the coldness, but because of it. Because they knew that when everything went wrong, he would not be paralyzed by emotion. He would think. He would choose correctly. He would bring them home. He stood at the window for a long time with the offer in his hand and dismantled it piece by piece and arrived every time at the same conclusion. Accept it. Then he put the paper down and went to find her. She was in the kitchen, an incongruous detail that had stopped striking him as incongruous days ago, standing at the counter with a cup of something hot, her eyes on the window and the expression she wore when she thought no one was looking, which was the only expression on her face that had no armor in it. It was not a soft expression. It was something older than soft, something that had once been soft and had learned, through extended and patient brutality, to present differently. She didn't turn around. She knew he was there. One look at his face told her what had happened. They made contact, he said. I know. A pause. What did they offer? Everything reasonable, he said. She nodded slowly. Then you should take it. The sentence cost her something. He heard it, that faint grain of effort, like a door held shut from the inside against something pressing hard from the other side. She meant it as a release. She was giving him the exit with both hands, freely, because she had never once expected to be chosen and had stopped being surprised by the confirmation of it. He found that he could not do it. Not the calculation that remained unchanged and argued clearly for the find. Reasonable thing. Something else. Something that had no language in the vocabulary he'd spent 20 years building. Something that had begun in an alley when she'd reached for a piece of glass with bleeding hands and told him not to. He had made his first mistake the night he carried her home. He made his second now, deliberately, with both eyes open. He chose her, not in spite of what it would cost, but fully aware of every line item on the invoice, which was the only way he knew how to choose anything. The war he can't win yet. The war didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived the way all serious things arrived, slowly, and then everywhere at once. A contact who stopped returning calls. A shipment delayed without explanation, the delay phrased too carefully to be accidental. An ally, decades reliable, who requested a meeting and then rescheduled it twice, and then went very quiet, in a way that meant someone was talking to him and he was listening. The ground was shifting. Adrian felt it the way he felt most things, not through obvious signals, but through the aggregate of small deviations, the way a navigator felt the current changing before the surface betrayed anything. He managed it. That was what he did. He managed, he adjusted, he turned pressure into leverage and leverage into position. He was very good at it. He had been good at it since before he could articulate the skill in words, and he was better at it now than he had ever been. But the situation had a new variable. She'd stopped pretending to be temporary. Not a decision announced, nothing between them was ever announced, neither of them having the temperament for declarations, but a gradual, undeniable settling. She stayed. She learned his rhythms. She began, with that same exhausting perceptiveness, to anticipate his thinking before he articulated it, appearing in a doorway with information he'd been about to ask for, flagging a detail in a report he'd almost missed, watching his face across a room full of people who were trying to navigate him, and seeing through all of it to the specific thing he was weighing. No one had ever seen him like that. He didn't know what to do with it, which was itself a novel experience for a man who always knew what to do. Late one night, when the building had gone quiet and they were alone in the way that felt different from simply being without other people in the room, she looked at him, across the map, spread between them routes, threats, the geometry of a war being waged in increments, and he understood that the most dangerous thing in his life was not the organization hunting them, it was her, specifically her. The way she fit into the space beside him with the precision of something that had always been designed to go there. He had let a weapon into his world. He understood that now with perfect clarity, the same clarity he brought to every other assessment. She was dangerous not because she might betray him, though that remained a theoretical possibility, but because she had already made the world inside his walls feel like a different kind of place than it had ever been before, warmer. Less like an operation, and more like a life. Adrian Volkov did not live lives. He ran operations. He managed assets. He survived, cleanly and without sentiment, the things that came for him. But something had come for him that he hadn't calculated for, and standing at the edge of a war he didn't yet know how to win, looking at the woman who had walked into it beside him without being asked, he thought for the first time in 20 years that there were fates worse than losing, and most of them involved surviving without her.